I sat in the third row at the memorial service, surrounded by faces I'd known for decades, yet I felt invisible. All eyes were fixed on the woman in the front pew, perfectly composed in her black Chanel suit, dabbing at tears that never quite fell. My sister-in-law Janet reached over and squeezed my hand, whispering, "Stay strong, Claire." But how could I, when the woman everyone was consoling wasn't me, the wife of 32 years, but Victoria Sterling, my husband's business partner. The funeral home in Greenwich smelled of lilies and expensive perfume. James had always loved simplicity, but this was a spectacle. Victoria had insisted on handling all the arrangements. "You're too distraught," she'd told me, 3 days after James died of a sudden heart attack. "Let me take care of everything." Like a fool, I'd agreed. I was too numb, too shattered by the loss of the man I'd built a life with since we were both 25. Now, watching her accept condolences like a grieving widow, something twisted in my chest. Our daughter Emma sat beside Victoria, not beside me. My own daughter, 28 years old, and she'd chosen to sit with that woman. When had that happened? When had Victoria become more important to Emma than her own mother? The service ended, and people began filing out to their cars for the procession to the cemetery. I stood, smoothing down my simple black dress, the one James had always said made my eyes look green. Emma walked past me without a glance, her arm linked with Victoria's. That's when I saw it. The diamond bracelet on Victoria's wrist, the one James had given me for our 20th anniversary. The one that had disappeared from my jewelry box 6 months ago. My blood ran cold. At the cemetery, I stood apart from the crowd as the minister spoke about James's contributions to the community, his success in building Sterling and Associates from the ground up. Victoria stood at the head of the casket, Emma beside her, both of them crying. I didn't cry. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at that bracelet, catching the October sunlight. After they lowered James into the ground, Victoria approached me. "Claire," she said softly, "I know this is difficult, but we need to discuss the business. James and I had been working on some restructuring before he passed. There are papers you'll need to sign." "Papers?" I managed to say. "For the transition. I'll have my attorney contact you next week." She touched my arm, a gesture that might have seemed comforting to anyone watching. "Don't worry, you'll be taken care of." The way she said it made my skin crawl. That night, I sat in James's study, surrounded by his things, his reading glasses on the desk, his favorite scotch, half empty, the framed photo of us on our wedding day, young and impossibly hopeful. I picked up the frame, and that's when I noticed a slight gap between the frame's backing and the desk. I pulled it closer. There, wedged behind the frame, was a small key. I'd never seen it before. My hands shook as I examined it. It was too small for a door, too ornate for a file cabinet. I searched the study, pulling out drawers, checking behind books. Nothing. Then I remembered James's antique desk had a secret compartment. He'd shown it to me once, decades ago, laughing about how his grandfather used it to hide love letters from his grandmother. I felt along the underside of the top drawer until I found the small indentation. The panel slid open, revealing a narrow space. Inside was a locked metal box. The key fit perfectly. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents, bank statements for accounts I'd never seen, properties I didn't know we owned. And then, at the bottom, a manila envelope with my name written in James's handwriting. I opened it. "My dearest Claire," the letter began. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I fear Victoria has moved faster than I anticipated." My heart stopped. I kept reading, each word like a hammer blow. James had discovered 6 months ago that Victoria had been embezzling from the company for years. She'd hidden it brilliantly, creating shell companies, falsifying records. When James confronted her, she'd threatened to destroy him, claiming they'd been having an affair and that he was complicit in the fraud. She had fabricated evidence, photos, emails, receipts. "I couldn't go to the police," he wrote. "She made it clear she'd drag you and Emma through a scandal that would destroy everything we've built. She wants the company, Claire. She's been positioning herself to take it for years. I've been gathering evidence to expose her, but I need more time. I've moved our assets into accounts she can't access. The documentation is in this box. If anything happens to me, especially anything sudden, please know it wasn't natural. Victoria mentioned she had ways to make problems disappear. I didn't take her seriously enough. The letter slipped from my fingers. James didn't die of a heart attack. He was murdered. I sat there for hours, reading through everything. Bank records showing Victoria's theft of over $4 million. Emails between her and someone named Marcus about handling the James problem. Communication with Emma. Dated back 2 years, Victoria carefully cultivating a relationship with my daughter, turning her against me with lies about James and I planning to cut her out of the business. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. The meeting with Victoria's attorney was scheduled for the following Tuesday at her office in Stamford. I arrived early, wearing my best suit, the navy one James had bought me for our last anniversary. I carried a simple leather briefcase. Victoria was already there, sitting behind a massive mahogany desk that used to be James's. Emma sat to her right, looking uncomfortable but defiant. The attorney, a sharp-faced man named Richard Pemberton, gestured to the chair across from them. "Mrs. Sterling." "Thank you for coming," Pemberton said. "We'll try to make this as painless as possible." "I appreciate that," I said calmly, setting my briefcase on the floor beside me. Victoria leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. "Claire, I know this is overwhelming. James and I had been restructuring the company for months. He wanted to ensure his legacy would continue, and frankly, he felt you weren't equipped to handle the business side of things." I said nothing. In his updated will, Pemberton continued, sliding a document across the desk. Mr. Sterling left the company and all associated assets to Miss Sterling, Victoria Sterling. As his business partner and the person most familiar with operations, she's best positioned to maintain what he built. "His updated will?" I asked quietly. "Yes. Signed and witnessed 6 weeks ago." Pemberton tapped the signature line. "You'll retain the house in Greenwich and a modest monthly allowance from the estate. Miss Sterling has graciously agreed to this arrangement." Emma spoke for the first time. "Mom," Victoria explained everything. "Dad knew you'd want to retire anyway. This way, you don't have to worry about running the company. Victoria will take care of everything." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. When had she become so blind? Or had I been the blind one, not seeing how Victoria had been manipulating her for years? "I see," I said. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Before I sign anything, I'd like you to look at this." I slid it across the desk. Victoria's face remained composed, but I saw the slight tightening around her eyes. Pemberton opened the folder. His expression changed immediately. "What is this?" "That," I said, "is documentation of systematic embezzlement from Sterling and Associates over a 7-year period. Bank statements, forged invoices, wire transfers to offshore accounts, all in Victoria's name." Victoria stood abruptly. "That's absurd. Claire, grief has obviously—" "Sit down," I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "I'm not finished." I pulled out another document. "This is the real will. James's actual last will and testament, signed 2 months ago in front of his personal attorney, David Chen, and witnessed by 2 notaries, not the fabricated one you presented today." Pemberton's face had gone pale. He was looking at the signature, comparing it to the document he'd just shown me. "You'll notice," I continued, "that the will you have is forged. Rather skillfully, I'll admit. But James had a distinctive way of signing his name, a small flourish on the J that you missed. David Chen has the original in his safe. I called him yesterday. He was quite surprised to learn there was another will floating around." Emma stared at me, then at Victoria. "What is she talking about?" I turned to my daughter. "Victoria has been stealing from your father's company for years. When he discovered it, she threatened him. Then she cultivated a relationship with you to isolate me, to make sure she'd have an ally when she made her move." "That's insane," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its confidence. I pulled out the final document. "This is a letter from your father, Emma, written 6 months before he died. Read it." I slid it across to her. I watched my daughter's face as she read James's words, watched the realization dawn, the betrayal sink in. Tears began streaming down her face. "Dad thought," she whispered. "He thought you might have killed him?" "I didn't kill anyone," Victoria snapped. James had a heart condition. Everyone knew that. He did have a heart condition, I agreed. Mild arrhythmia, managed with medication. But the autopsy I requested showed elevated levels of potassium chloride in his system. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to trigger a fatal arrhythmia in someone with his condition. The police are very interested in this finding, especially combined with the emails in that folder, the ones between you and Marcus Chen discussing pharmaceutical solutions. The room went silent. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. Marcus Chen was arrested this morning. He's singing like a canary, Victoria. He gave you up in exchange for a reduced sentence. I stood, gathering my documents. The company, the assets, all of it reverts to me as James's legal wife. The forged will is evidence in a criminal case, and you're going to prison. I turned to Pemberton. I suggest you find new representation, counselor. I'd hate for the Connecticut Bar Association to learn you knowingly presented a forged will. He was already gathering his things. Emma sat frozen, the letter from her father clutched in her hands. Mom, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. She told me you and Dad were having problems, that you wanted to push me out of the family business, that I know what she told you, I said gently. We'll talk later. Right now, I need you to come with me. There are people who'll want to take your statement. As we walked out of that office, Victoria screamed after us. Threats, denials, desperate pleas. I didn't turn around. The next 3 months were a blur of police interviews, meetings with attorneys, and endless paperwork. Marcus Chen testified that Victoria had hired him to handle James, providing him with potassium chloride and instructions on how to introduce it into James's coffee over several weeks. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity, a slow buildup that would trigger a heart attack in a man with a known heart condition. No one would question it. But Victoria had underestimated one thing. She'd underestimated me. The trial was brief. With Marcus's testimony, the forensic evidence, and the paper trail of embezzlement, Victoria's defense crumbled. She was sentenced to 30 years for murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Emma and I stood outside the courthouse as they led Victoria away in handcuffs. My daughter had been by my side through everything, horrified by how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. How did you know? Emma asked. How did you know to look for evidence? I thought about that key, hidden behind our wedding photo. About James, even in death, trying to protect me. Your father left me breadcrumbs. He knew I'd find them when I was ready. I'm so sorry, Mom, for sitting with her at the funeral, for believing her lies about you and Dad, for everything. I pulled my daughter close. She was very good at what she did. She played on your insecurities, your desire to be part of the business. That's not your fault. What happens now? She asked. Now? I looked up at the courthouse, thinking about James, about the life we'd built, and the justice I'd finally gotten for him. Now we rebuild Sterling and Associates. Together, the way your father wanted. Emma wiped her eyes. I don't know anything about running a company. Neither did I admitted. But I learned, and so will you. That evening, I went back to James's study. I poured 2 glasses of his favorite scotch and sat in his leather chair. I raised 1 glass to his photo. We got her, sweetheart, I whispered. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd taken everything, the company, our daughter, even your life. But she underestimated us. She underestimated what we built together. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through me. For the first time since James died, I felt something other than grief and rage. I felt peace. The next morning, I drove to Sterling and Associates. The brass nameplate on the building gleamed in the sunlight. I'd thought about changing it, but Emma had argued against it. It's Dad's legacy, she'd said. Let's honor it. Inside, the staff greeted me cautiously. They'd all heard about Victoria's arrest, about the embezzlement and murder charges. Many of them had worked for James for years, and they were reeling from the betrayal. I called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. 43 employees gathered, anxious and uncertain about their futures. I know the past few months have been difficult, I began. You've lost a leader you respected and discovered that someone you trusted was stealing from this company from all of you. Your 401ks, your bonuses, Your job security, Victoria, put all of it at risk for her own greed. I paused, looking at each face. But this company is still here. The foundation James built is still solid. And I promise you, we're going to not only recover but thrive. There will be changes. There will be new policies and oversight. But Sterling and Associates will continue. A hand went up. Tom Rodriguez, one of the senior project managers. Mrs. Sterling, with all due respect, most of us don't know you. How do we know you can run this company? Fair question. You don't, I admitted. I've spent 32 years supporting James from home, raising our daughter, managing our household. I don't have an MBA or a background in construction management. But I have something Victoria never had. I care about this company, beyond what it can give me. I care about the people James employed, the legacy he built, the integrity he valued above all else. I pulled out a folder. I've spent the last month reviewing every contract, every project, every relationship this company has. I've brought in auditors to ensure Victoria's theft didn't compromise our obligations. I've spoken with our clients, and I've made a decision. I looked at Emma, who stood at the back of the room. My daughter Emma will be taking over as Chief Operating Officer. She has her father's vision and, unlike me, she has training in business management. She'll be working closely with Tom and the senior team to ensure continuity. And what will you do? Someone asked. I'll be chair of the board. I'll provide oversight, maintain client relationships, and make sure this company stays true to the values James instilled. I'll also be establishing the James Sterling Integrity Fund, a program using the recovered embezzled funds to provide scholarships for children of our employees and to support ethical business practices in our industry. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Tom stood. I'm in. If Emma's willing to learn and you're willing to lead, I'm in. One by one, the others stood as well. 6 months later, Sterling and Associates had not only recovered, but had landed the biggest contract in company history, a sustainable housing development in Hartford worth $40 million. Emma had proven herself to be a natural leader, combining James's strategic thinking with a collaborative approach that energized the team. I sat in my office. I'd finally moved into the one that had been James's, then briefly Victoria's, looking at the photo I'd placed on the desk. It was from our 25th anniversary, both of us laughing at some joke I couldn't remember now. Next to it was the letter he'd left me, framed. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Mom, the Hartford client just signed. Dad would be so proud. I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. He is, sweetheart, I typed back. Wherever he is, he's proud of both of us. That night, I went home to the house in Greenwich. It felt different now, not empty, but peaceful. I'd thought about selling it, but Emma had convinced me to keep it. Too many good memories, she'd said. She was right. Despite everything, this house held 32 years of love, laughter, and life. Victoria couldn't take that away. I walked into the garden where James had planted roses every year for our anniversary. They were blooming now, deep red and fragrant. I'd kept up the tradition, tending them myself. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I thought about that day at the memorial service. How invisible I'd felt, how lost, how Victoria had stood there, playing the grieving partner, wearing my bracelet, stealing my daughter's loyalty, thinking she'd gotten away with everything. She'd thought she'd won. But she'd forgotten one thing. Underestimating a woman who spent 32 years loving a good man is a fatal mistake. That love doesn't disappear with death. It transforms into something stronger, something fierce, something willing to fight for justice, for truth, for the legacy that love built. I'd fought. I'd won. And in winning, I'd found myself again. I touched the roses, remembering James's hands covered in soil, his laugh when I'd complain about thorns. Beautiful things are worth the pain, he'd always say. He was right about that too. I pulled out my phone and called Emma. Dinner tomorrow? Just us? I'd love that, Mom. Thank you. For everything. For fighting for Dad. For fighting for us. Always, I said softly. I'll always fight for us. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. Victoria was gone, The company was thriving. My relationship with Emma was healing. And I, Claire Sterling, the woman who'd sat invisible in the third row at her husband's funeral, had stepped into the light. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, and somewhere, I knew James was smiling.